Maya Johnson straightened her charcoal gray suit jacket and checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the county courthouse. The small gold cross that hung from her necklace caught the fluorescent light, and she tucked it neatly inside her cream-colored blouse before buttoning her jacket. She'd worn this cross for 15 years, a gift from her grandmother when she passed the bar exam. It was simple, understated, and brought her comfort during difficult cases. Today's case was exactly that kind of challenge. Her client, Mrs. Rivera, was facing eviction after 30 years in the same apartment building. The new owners were clearing out long-term tenants to renovate and double the rent. Mrs. Rivera lived on a fixed income and had nowhere else to go. Maya took a deep breath, gathered her documents, and headed for courtroom 4B. Oi. Rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Keller, the bailiff announced as Maya settled beside Mrs. Rivera at the plaintiff's table. Judge Keller entered, with the confidence of someone who had controlled this domain for over 2 decades. At 62, his silver hair and perpetual frown gave him an air of authority that intimidated most attorneys, especially newer ones. Maya had appeared before him twice before. He was known for being strict but generally fair, at least according to most of the white attorneys she knew. "Be seated," he said, adjusting his glasses as he glanced at the day's docket. The courtroom settled into its routine. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting dust particles floating in the air. The wood-paneled walls and polished benches gave an air of tradition and permanence that Maya had always found both impressive and slightly intimidating. First case. West Side. Properties versus Rivera, the clerk announced. Maya rose. Maya Johnson for the defendant, Your Honor. Judge Keller looked up, his eyes scanning Maya briefly before narrowing slightly. He paused, then addressed the attorney for West Side Properties, an older white man named Howard Phillips whom Maya had faced several times before. "Mr. Phillips, your opening statement, please." Phillips launched into his argument, the same one he'd used in dozens of similar cases. The building needed essential renovations. The owners had followed all legal requirements for terminating the lease. Mrs. Rivera had been given proper notice. Maya jotted notes, preparing her counter-arguments. She felt confident in her case. The building owners had failed to address several housing code violations, and she had documentation of their pattern of targeting elderly tenants while ignoring younger ones with the same lease terms. When Phillips finished, Judge Keller turned to Maya. "Ms. Johnson, you may proceed." Maya stood, buttoning her jacket. As she did, her cross necklace slipped out from her blouse. "Before you begin, Ms. Johnson," Judge Keller interrupted, his voice sharp. "What is that you're wearing?" Maya glanced down, noticing her necklace had become visible. "My cross, Your Honor." The judge's frown deepened. "Are you aware of the court's dress code regarding visible religious symbols?" Maya's mind raced. She had seen dozens of attorneys wear religious jewelry in this courthouse. Crosses, stars of David, even small lapel pins with religious symbols. Just yesterday, she'd noticed a white attorney wearing a much larger cross while arguing before this same judge. "I apologize if I've violated any code, Your Honor, but this court requires neutral professional attire. Religious displays are inappropriate and potentially prejudicial to proceedings." Judge Keller's voice had risen slightly, drawing attention from others in the courtroom. Maya noticed several attorneys in the gallery exchange glances. One white woman attorney instinctively touched her own necklace, a small cross not unlike Maya's, and then quickly lowered her hand. "Your Honor, I respectfully, Ms. Johnson, I find you in contempt. $500, payable to the clerk by the end of business today." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Mrs. Rivera clutched Maya's arm, her eyes wide with worry. Maya stood perfectly still, her mind calculating the implications of challenging this ruling here and now. She had a client depending on her. Making this about herself would only hurt Mrs. Rivera's chances. "I understand, Your Honor," she said evenly. "May I proceed with my argument for Mrs. Rivera now?" Something flickered across Judge Keller's face, perhaps surprise at her calm acceptance, perhaps something else. He nodded curtly. Maya slipped the necklace back inside her blouse and launched into her prepared statement. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't let anger sharpen her tone. Instead, she presented her case with the calm precision that had become her trademark. "Mrs. Rivera has lived in her apartment for 30 years without a single late payment. The building code violations documented in exhibits, A through D, show that the landlord's claim of necessary renovations is merely a pretext for removing long-term tenants with protected rent rates. She continued methodically, laying out evidence and citing relevant precedents. Despite the contempt charge hanging over her, Maya kept her focus entirely on her client's needs. In the gallery, Tasha Bailey, another attorney and Maya's close friend since law school, watched with a mixture of anger and admiration. She had seen this happen before, the subtle and not-so-subtle ways the justice system treated black attorneys differently. Yet Maya never let it throw her off her game. Judge Keller seemed to be listening with increased attention, perhaps surprised by the quality of Maya's arguments despite his earlier interruption. When she finished, he turned to Phillips for rebuttal. Phillips seemed flustered. He hadn't expected such a thorough challenge. Your Honor, the building's condition meets all current code requirements. These so-called violations are minor cosmetic issues at best. Then you won't mind explaining why the city housing inspector cited the building 6 times in the past year? Maya countered when it was her turn again. Or why the only tenants receiving these notices are over 60 years old and paying below market rent? By the end of the hearing, even Judge Keller seemed impressed despite himself. I'll take this matter under advisement and issue my ruling by the end of the week, he announced. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Maya packed her documents carefully, giving Mrs. Rivera a reassuring smile. What happens now? Mrs. Rivera asked, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. Now we wait for the judge's decision, Maya explained gently. But I think we made a strong case today. Try not to worry too much. After Mrs. Rivera left, Tasha approached Maya at the plaintiff's table. I can't believe what just happened, she whispered. Henderson was wearing a cross yesterday in this same courtroom and Keller didn't say a word. Maya nodded slightly but kept her voice neutral. It is what it is. I need to stop by the clerk's office to pay this fine. You're not going to challenge it? Maya, this is blatant. Not now, Maya said quietly, noticing Judge Keller's clerk watching them. Let's talk later. As they walked out of the courtroom, Maya noticed several other attorneys watching her, some with sympathy, others with curiosity, a few with something like respect. She held her head high, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. At the clerk's office, Maya wrote a check for $500, money she had been saving toward a new laptop. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Denise who had worked at the courthouse for years, looked uncomfortable as she processed the payment. I've never seen Judge Keller do that before, Denise said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. And I've seen plenty of folks wear religious items in his courtroom. Maya simply nodded. Thank you, Denise. Outside the courthouse, Tasha was waiting, still fuming. You can't let this go, Maya. It's wrong and you know it. The afternoon sun was warm on Maya's face as she considered her friend's words. A group of pigeons scattered as they walked down the courthouse steps. I'm not letting it go, Maya finally said, her voice calm, but with an undertone of steel that Tasha recognized from their toughest cases in law school. But I'm not going to react the way he expects either. What do you mean? Maya's eyes reflected a quiet determination. I mean, I'm going to handle this my way. Carefully. Thoroughly. And when I'm done, Judge Keller is going to wish he'd never noticed my necklace. Tasha's anger transformed into a slow smile. You've got that look. The one you had before you destroyed Professor Wilson's argument in constitutional law, after he said women didn't belong in courtrooms. I need to do some research, Maya said as they reached the parking lot. Can you come by my place tonight? Bring your laptop and maybe some dinner? I'll be there at 7 with Thai food and righteous anger, Tasha promised. As Maya drove home, she replayed the morning's events in her mind. The contempt charge wasn't just about a necklace. It was about power and who was allowed to exercise it. About unwritten rules that seemed to shift depending on who you were. She had encountered these shifting standards throughout her career. These invisible lines that seemed to be drawn and redrawn wherever she stood. But Maya had learned long ago not to fight on ground her opponents chose. Judge Keller expected an emotional reaction, anger, indignation, or tearful compliance. He wouldn't get any of those from her. Instead, he would get something far more dangerous, Maya Johnson, methodically building a case the way she had been taught by her grandmother, a woman who had cleaned courthouses at night while studying law books she wasn't allowed to use during the day. By the time Maya parked outside her apartment building, the sting of the morning's humiliation had transformed into focused determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every Mrs. Rivera who needed someone like her. Someone who wouldn't be distracted or defeated by the Judge Kellers of the world. Maya touched the cross beneath her blouse and smiled slightly. The judge had no idea what he had just set in motion. Maya's apartment was modest but comfortable, located in a brick building that had seen better days but still held on to its dignity, much like many of her clients. The walls were lined with bookshelves, each one packed with legal texts, case studies, and the occasional mystery novel for those rare evenings when she allowed herself to relax. She changed out of her court clothes into soft gray sweatpants and a faded university t-shirt, then moved to her small dining table that doubled as a desk. The wooden surface was soon covered with open books, legal pads, and her laptop. A cup of tea steamed beside her as her fingers flew across the keyboard. Maya wasn't interested in simply fighting the contempt charge. She wanted to understand the pattern, to gather evidence that would be impossible to dismiss. If Judge Keller had singled her out, she needed to know if this was his first time or part of a larger issue. The courthouse had a public database of cases, including contempt charges. Maya had access through her firm's subscription. She created a spreadsheet, methodically documenting every contempt charge Judge Keller had issued over the past 5 years. She noted the attorney's name, gender, and when possible, race. She documented the stated reason for each charge and the amount of the fine. By the time her doorbell rang at 7, Maya had filled several pages of notes and identified some troubling patterns. "I brought extra spring rolls," Tasha announced as she walked in, holding up a bag of fragrant Thai food. She paused, taking in the explosion of papers and books. "Looks like you've been busy." Maya stood, stretching her back. "Thanks for coming. And for the food. I forgot to eat lunch." Tasha set the food on the kitchen counter and began unpacking containers while Maya cleared some space on the table. "So what's the plan? File a complaint with the Judicial Review Board?" Maya shook her head. "Not yet. Complaints get buried, especially against someone like Keller who's been on the bench for 20 years. I need something more solid." They filled their plates and returned to the table. Maya showed Tasha what she'd found so far. "In the past 5 years, Judge Keller has issued 43 contempt charges," Maya explained. 29 were against women. Of those, 18 were against women of color. Tasha whistled low. "That's not subtle. It gets worse. The average fine for white male attorneys was $250. For everyone else, it averaged $475. This is the kind of thing the Bar Association should be looking at," Tasha said. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "They should, but they don't," Maya replied. "But that's just the beginning. I've been looking at the stated reasons for the contempt charges. For white male attorneys, it's almost always about actual courtroom behavior, interrupting, arriving late, unprepared arguments. For everyone else, especially women of color, it's often about appearance or tone." Tasha's face darkened. "The old aggressive label. Exactly. And here's what's interesting about the religious symbol issue." Maya pulled out a legal pad with handwritten notes. "The court dress code doesn't actually prohibit religious jewelry. It only states that attire should be professional and not distracting. So he made up a rule on the spot?" "Looks that way. And I've found 7 cases where attorneys were clearly wearing religious symbols in his courtroom with no issue. All white attorneys." Tasha opened her laptop. "I've got access to the courthouse security footage through the public defender's office. Let's see if we can spot some of these instances." For the next 3 hours, they combed through footage, court transcripts, and case files. They ordered more tea, and when that wasn't enough, switched to coffee. Maya's living room floor became covered with printouts organized in careful piles. "Look at this one," Tasha said around midnight, turning her laptop screen toward Maya. The footage showed a court session from 2 months earlier. A white female attorney stood before Judge Keller wearing a cross nearly identical to Maya's, completely visible above her suit jacket. The judge showed no reaction whatsoever. "Add it to the file," Maya said, rubbing her tired eyes. "That makes 8 documented instances." "This is exhausting," Tasha said, leaning back in her chair. "And infuriating. How do you stay so calm about it?" Maya was quiet for a moment, looking at the wall where a single framed photo hung. Her grandmother in her graduation cap and gown, the first in their family to finish college. though barred from the law career she'd wanted by the realities of her time. My grandmother used to say that anger is fuel, Maya finally said. Use too much at once, you burn out. Use it carefully, it can power you through the longest journey. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Besides, getting angry is what they expect. They know how to handle anger, dismiss it, minimize it, use it against you. But careful, methodical legal argument? That's harder to brush aside. Tasha joined her at the window. So what's next? I need to find court precedents. Religious expression has been protected in government settings before, including courtrooms. I need to build a constitutional argument. Constitutional law was always your thing, Tasha said with a small smile. Remember how Professor Williams used to call on you whenever the discussions got stuck? Maya smiled at the memory. I need to be thorough. This isn't just about my necklace or the $500. It's about making sure he can't keep doing this to others. You know, Tasha said carefully, this could affect your career. Judges have long memories and Keller has a lot of friends on the bench. Maya nodded. I know, but some things matter more. They worked for another hour before Tasha headed home, promising to send any additional footage she could access. Maya should have gone to bed. She had another case tomorrow, though thankfully not in Judge Keller's courtroom. Instead, she found herself pulling out more books, digging deeper into constitutional law. Around 3 a.m, she found what she was looking for, a Ninth Circuit decision from 8 years ago that addressed almost exactly this situation. A Muslim attorney had been held in contempt for wearing a hijab in a courtroom in California. The appeals court had overturned the contempt charge, citing First Amendment protections. Maya printed the case and added it to her growing file. Finally, she allowed herself to sleep for a few hours before her alarm woke her for another day. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. Maya handled her regular caseload during the day, then spent her evenings building her argument. She contacted other attorneys who had appeared before Judge Keller, carefully documenting their experiences. Several had stories similar to hers but had never formally complained, fearing retaliation. On Wednesday, she received a call from Mrs. Rivera. Ms. Johnson, the judge made his decision, Mrs. Rivera said, her voice shaking slightly. We won. The eviction is denied and they have to fix the heating before winter. Despite her exhaustion, Maya felt a surge of satisfaction. That's wonderful news, Mrs. Rivera. Judge Keller made the right decision. He said something about their notice being procedurally insufficient and mentioned the code violations you found. I didn't understand all of it, but my neighbor helped me understand the important part. I get to stay in my home. After hanging up, Maya sat quietly for a moment. Even Judge Keller, with his biases, had followed the law in Mrs. Rivera's case. It was a reminder that the system, for all its flaws, could still work when pushed in the right direction. That evening, Tasha came by again with news. I found something interesting, she said, pulling out her tablet. Keller cited another attorney for religious attire last year, a young Muslim woman wearing a headscarf. The transcript shows he used almost the same language he used with you. What happened to her case? She paid the fine and then transferred to another district. Word is she was so humiliated she couldn't face going back to his courtroom. Maya added this information to her file. That makes it even more important to address this properly. By Friday, 1 week after the contempt charge, Maya had assembled a comprehensive legal brief. She had 27 documented instances of religious symbols being worn in Judge Keller's courtroom without issue, all by white attorneys. She had constitutional precedents, court rules, and statistical evidence of the judge's pattern of discriminatory contempt charges. She also had her next court appearance before Judge Keller scheduled for Monday morning, a simple probate matter that would normally take less than 30 minutes. Are you sure about this? Tasha asked as they reviewed the final brief on Sunday night. You could just file a complaint with the Judicial Review Board instead of confronting him directly. Maya closed the folder containing her carefully organized evidence. I'm sure. The board might eventually issue a private reprimand that no one would ever know about. This needs to happen in open court, where there are witnesses and a record. You always were the brave one, Tasha said with a mixture of admiration and concern. Not brave, Maya corrected her. Just stubborn, and very, very prepared. That night, Maya slept surprisingly well. The fear and anger of the past week had transformed into something else, a calm determination backed by knowledge and preparation. She had done everything possible to ensure her argument was flawless. In the morning, she dressed with care, choosing a navy blue suit that was perfectly professional. Around her neck, visible above her blouse, she wore her grandmother's cross. This time, she had no intention of hiding it. Monday morning arrived, with gray skies and a light drizzle that turned the courthouse steps slick. Maya arrived 45 minutes early, her briefcase heavier than usual with the extra documents she'd prepared. She nodded to the security guards who knew her by name and made her way to courtroom 4B. The room was empty except for a court clerk setting up for the day. Maya chose a seat in the front row, reviewing her notes one last time. Her client for today's probate hearing, an elderly man named Mr. Chen, had agreed to meet her directly in the courtroom. She'd explained nothing about her plans to challenge the contempt charge. That was her personal battle, and she wouldn't risk her client's case by mixing the two. Slowly, the courtroom began to fill. Legal assistants, attorneys waiting for their cases to be called, a few members of the public. Maya spotted Tasha slipping in to sit near the back. They exchanged a brief glance, and Tasha gave her a subtle thumbs up. At 9 Mr. Chen arrived, a gentle-mannered man in his 70s who had recently lost his wife and needed help settling her modest estate. Maya greeted him warmly and explained what to expect from the probate hearing, carefully going through each form he'd need to sign. All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Keller, the bailiff announced precisely at 9. The judge entered, his robes swirling around him. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and began reviewing the day's docket. First case. In the matter of the estate of Linda Chen, he announced. Maya stood. Maya Johnson for the petitioner, Your Honor. Judge Keller glanced up, his expression changing almost imperceptibly when he recognized her. His eyes flicked to her necklace, visible above her blouse, then back to her face. Ms. Johnson, he acknowledged, his tone neutral, but cool. Your Honor, before we proceed with the probate matter, I respectfully request 5 minutes to address the court regarding the contempt charge issued against me last Monday. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Keller's eyebrows rose slightly. This is highly irregular, Ms. Johnson. If you wish to appeal the contempt charge, there are proper channels. I'm aware of the proper channels, Your Honor, Maya replied evenly. However, as the contempt charge was issued in open court, I believe it's appropriate to address it in the same venue. I promise to be brief and respectful. The judge studied her for a long moment. Maya stood perfectly still, her expression professional and composed. Finally, he nodded. Very well. 5 minutes, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Your Honor. Maya turned to Mr. Chen. Sir, would you mind if I take a few minutes before your case? This won't affect your matter at all. The elderly man nodded, curious but trusting. Maya placed her briefcase on the table and removed a thin folder. She approached the podium, standing tall with her shoulders back. The cross at her neck caught the light. Your Honor, last Monday you held me in contempt for wearing this religious symbol in your courtroom, citing an unwritten rule against visible religious displays. I paid the $500 fine without protest at that time because I had a client who needed my full attention. She opened her folder and removed a document. However, upon review of the official court dress code, I find no prohibition against religious jewelry or symbols. The code only states that attorneys must dress in a professional, non-distracting manner appropriate to court proceedings. Judge Keller's expression remained impassive, but his fingers tapped lightly on his desk. Ms. Johnson, courts have broad discretion in determining what constitutes appropriate attire. That's correct, Your Honor. However, that discretion is not without limits. Maya's voice remained calm and conversational, as if they were discussing an abstract legal principle rather than her personal experience. The First Amendment protects religious expression, including religious attire, even in government settings like courtrooms. She placed another document on the podium. In Singh v. Carter, the court held that religious attire that doesn't disrupt proceedings is protected expression. In Goldstein v. New Jersey Superior Court, the Third Circuit specifically addressed religious jewelry in courtrooms, finding that small religious symbols like crosses, stars of David, and other faith emblems are protected when they don't interfere with court operations. The courtroom had grown completely silent. Even the court reporter seemed to be holding her breath between keystrokes. More concerning, Your Honor, is the pattern of selective enforcement. Maya placed a third document on the podium. I've documented 27 instances over the past 3 years where attorneys have worn visible religious symbols in this courtroom without comment or penalty. Judge Keller's tapping fingers stilled. 27 instances? That seems highly speculative, Ms. Johnson. Not speculative, Your Honor. Documented. Maya lifted a flash drive. I have photographs from court proceedings, security footage available, through public records requests and sworn statements from 16 attorneys who regularly appear in this court. In each case, the attorney was wearing a visible religious symbol. In each case, no contempt charge was issued. She paused, letting the information sink in. What distinguishes these 27 instances from my case appears to be only one factor. In each of those instances, the attorney was white. A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. Judge Keller's face darkened. Ms. Johnson, you are veering dangerously close to accusing this court of racial bias. I'm presenting documented evidence of a pattern, Your Honor, Maya replied, her voice still measured and respectful. The facts speak for themselves, but this pattern extends beyond religious symbols. She placed another document on the podium. In reviewing contempt charges issued in this court over the past 5 years, I found that attorneys of color are 3 times more likely to be cited for contempt than white attorneys. When cited, they receive fines averaging 90% higher. The judge's jaw tightened. Ms. Johnson, your 5 minutes are nearly up. I understand, Your Honor. I'll conclude. Maya straightened her papers. Based on established case law protecting religious expression and the clear pattern of selective enforcement, I respectfully request that the court vacate the contempt charge, refund the fine I've already paid, and most importantly, establish clear, written guidelines that will be applied consistently to all attorneys regardless of race, gender, or background. She placed her complete brief on the clerk's desk. I've provided a full legal analysis with citations to relevant precedent and complete documentation of the pattern I've described. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Keller stared at Maya. For nearly 30 seconds, no one moved. Then, the judge removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Ms. Johnson, you've raised serious concerns that warrant consideration. I'll review your brief and evidence and issue a ruling on this matter by the end of the week. His tone had changed, becoming more formal, more cautious. Now, shall we proceed with the Chen probate matter? Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for your time. Maya returned to her seat beside Mr. Chen, who looked at her with new respect in his eyes. The probate hearing proceeded smoothly. Maya presented the necessary documents. Mr. Chen answered the judge's few questions, and the petition was approved without issue. Throughout the hearing, Judge Keller treated Maya with careful neutrality, his earlier coolness replaced by something that almost resembled professional respect. As they left the courtroom, Mr. Chen touched Maya's arm. My daughter is a law student, he said softly. I'm going to tell her about what you did today. Maya smiled. Tell her the law belongs to everyone, Mr. Chen. All it takes is the courage to use it. In the hallway, attorneys who had witnessed the exchange approached Maya. Some offered quiet congratulations while others shared their own stories of unequal treatment in the courts. A few looked nervous, as if worried about being associated with someone who had challenged a powerful judge. Tasha caught up with Maya near the elevators. That was masterful, she whispered. The way you laid it out. He couldn't dismiss it without looking even worse. Maya exhaled slowly, feeling the tension she'd been carrying begin to release. It's not over yet. He still has to make a ruling. After that presentation, with that many witnesses? Tasha shook her head. He's backed into a corner, and he knows it. But I'm more interested in what happened at the end of your probate hearing. What do you mean? The clerk was whispering to him while you were packing up. I couldn't hear what she said, but he looked surprised. Really surprised. Maya frowned slightly. Probably just something about the next case. Maybe. Tasha didn't look convinced. Or maybe someone finally told him who you really are. The elevator arrived and they stepped inside. As the doors closed, Maya allowed herself a small smile. I guess we'll find out when he issues his ruling. That afternoon, Maya received 3 phone calls from reporters who had heard about the morning's events. She politely declined to comment until after the judge's ruling. By evening, the local legal blog had posted a story titled, "Attorney Challenges Judge on Contempt Charge, Alleges Biased Enforcement." Maya read the article, then closed her laptop and went to stand by her apartment window. The rain had stopped and the setting sun broke through the clouds, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. She touched her grandmother's cross, thinking about how far they had come and how far there still was to go. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tasha. Court clerk called. "Judge Keller wants to see both sides in his chambers tomorrow morning at 8:30. It's happening." Maya took a deep breath. Whatever came next, she had spoken her truth backed by irrefutable evidence. That alone was victory enough. Maya arrived at the courthouse the next morning to find a small group of attorneys gathered near the entrance, talking in hushed tones. They fell silent as she approached, then one stepped forward. Lily Wong, a public defender Maya had worked with on several cases. "We heard about the meeting in Keller's chambers," Lily said. "A bunch of us wanted to be here. Just in case you need witnesses or support." Maya was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, but I think this will be fine. We'll be in the hallway if you need us," Lily assured her. The courthouse felt different that morning, the usual bustle replaced by a quiet tension. As Maya walked through security, several staff members nodded to her with what looked like newfound respect. She arrived at Judge Keller's chambers at exactly 8:25. His judicial assistant, a woman in her 50s named Beverly, who had worked at the courthouse for decades, looked up from her computer. "Good morning. Ms. Johnson, the judge is expecting you." Beverly's expression gave nothing away, but there was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Thank you. Am I the first to arrive?" Beverly nodded. "Yes, but..." She was interrupted by the phone on her desk. After a brief conversation, she hung up and turned back to Maya. "Judge Keller will see you now." "Shouldn't we wait for the court reporter and the other side?" Maya asked, surprised. "The judge said to send you in." Beverly stood and led Maya to the heavy wooden door of the judge's private chambers, knocked once and opened it. Judge Keller's chambers were exactly what Maya would have expected: dark wood paneling, shelves lined with leather-bound law books, and framed degrees and awards covering one wall. The judge himself sat behind an imposing desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a document. He looked up as Maya entered. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for coming." He gestured to one of the chairs across from his desk. "Please, have a seat." Maya sat, placing her briefcase beside her chair. "Good morning, Your Honor. I understood this would be a meeting with both sides present." "This is a different sort of meeting." Judge Keller removed his glasses and set them on the desk. For the first time, Maya noticed how tired he looked, with dark circles under his eyes. "I spent most of the night reviewing your brief and evidence." He tapped a thick folder on his desk, her documentation of his pattern of biased contempt charges. "This is thorough work. Thank you, Your Honor. I've been on the bench for 22 years. Ms. Johnson, no one has ever presented me with anything quite like this." Maya remained silent, waiting. The judge leaned back in his chair. "My clerk mentioned something interesting to me yesterday after your hearing." She said, "Do you know who that is?" I didn't understand what she meant at first. He picked up another folder from his desk. "So I did some research of my own last night. Harvard Law, class of 2009. Editor of the Law Review. Clerkship with Justice Brennan on the Supreme Court. Author of 3 scholarly articles on constitutional protections for religious expression. Counsel of record on 2 successful religious freedom cases before the Ninth Circuit." Maya hadn't expected this turn in the conversation. "My background wasn't relevant to Mrs. Rivera's eviction case, Your Honor." "No, but it is relevant to this discussion." Judge Keller opened the folder. "Particularly interesting is your work on Singh v. Westmoreland County, where you successfully argued that a Sikh attorney had the right to wear his turban in a Pennsylvania courtroom." He closed the folder and looked directly at her. "Why didn't you mention any of this last week when I cited you for contempt?" Maya met his gaze steadily. "Would it have mattered, Your Honor? Should it have mattered? The judge was silent for a moment. No, he finally said. It shouldn't have mattered. The law should be applied equally regardless of who stands before the court. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city waking up below. When I first took the bench, a senior judge gave me advice I've never forgotten. He said, "Your job isn't to be right. Your job is to do right." I've always thought I was following that advice. Maya remained quiet, sensing he wasn't finished. Your evidence suggests otherwise. He turned back to face her. The pattern you've documented, it's disturbing. Not just the religious symbols issue, but the overall disparity in how contempt charges have been applied in my courtroom. It often happens unconsciously. Your Honor, Maya said, her voice gentle but firm. That's why tracking the data is so important. Judge Keller nodded slowly. Yes, I see that now. He returned to his desk and sat down. Ms. Johnson, I've made a decision regarding your contempt charge. I'm vacating it immediately and will arrange for your fine to be refunded by the end of business today. Thank you, Your Honor. But that's not enough, is it? The judge picked up her brief again. Your final request was for clear written guidelines that will be applied consistently to all attorneys. Yes, Your Honor. I believe that would benefit everyone who appears in your courtroom. Judge Keller was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I'd like to go a step further. I'm forming a committee to review all the court's procedures and guidelines for potential bias. Not just in my courtroom, but throughout the district. And I'd like you to serve as a consultant to that committee. Maya hadn't expected this. I'm honored by the request, Your Honor. Don't be too honored yet, he said with a wry smile. It will be thankless work. Change always is. But it's necessary work. He extended his hand across the desk. And I owe you a personal apology, Ms. Johnson. I was wrong to single you out for wearing your cross. I was wrong not to recognize my own pattern of biased enforcement. And I was wrong to underestimate you based on assumptions I made when you walked into my courtroom. Maya stood and shook his hand. Apology accepted, Your Honor. I've drafted an order vacating the contempt charge, he said, handing her a document. I've also included a public acknowledgement of the inconsistent enforcement and my commitment to establishing clear guidelines going forward. With your permission, I'd like to read this in open court this morning. Maya scanned the document, impressed by the judge's forthright acknowledgement of the issues she'd raised. This is more than I expected, Your Honor. Thank you. Don't thank me for doing what should have been done all along. He glanced at his watch. Court begins in 20 minutes. I understand there are quite a few attorneys gathering in the hallway. Word travels fast in the courthouse, Maya said with a small smile. Indeed it does. Judge Keller put his glasses back on and picked up another file. Before you go, Ms. Johnson, there's one more matter I'd like to discuss. Yes? The Watkins civil rights case. It's coming up on my docket next month. A class action lawsuit against the city for discriminatory housing practices. He tapped the file. It's the kind of case that could set important precedent, but the plaintiffs need strong representation. Maya knew about the case, a group of families from the city's poorest neighborhood fighting against systematic housing discrimination that had gone on for decades. Several large firms had declined to take it due to the political implications. The current attorney of record is retiring due to health issues, the judge continued. The plaintiffs need someone with constitutional expertise and a track record of success in civil rights litigation. Someone like you? Maya felt a flutter of excitement. This was exactly the kind of case she had gone to law school hoping to work on, the kind that could create real, lasting change for an entire community. I'd be very interested in discussing the case with the plaintiffs, she said carefully. I thought you might be. Judge Keller handed her the file. Their contact information is inside. And before you worry about ethical concerns, I've already arranged to have the case reassigned to Judge Wilson if you take it. No appearance of impropriety. As Maya left the judge's chambers, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. One conversation wouldn't change decades of systemic issues, but it was a start. A crack in the wall that might, with continued pressure, eventually bring the whole structure down. In the hallway, the group of waiting attorneys had grown larger. Tasha pushed through the crowd, her expression anxious. What happened? Are you okay? Maya nodded, still processing the unexpected turn of events. The contempt charge is vacated. The fine will be refunded. And Judge Keller is forming a committee to review court procedures for bias. A murmur of surprise ran through the gathered attorneys. He's going to make a statement in open court this morning, Maya added. Lily Wong stepped forward. That's not what any of us expected. He also apologized, Maya said quietly, personally. And he's asked me to consult on the committee. Tasha's eyes widened. Are you going to do it? Maya thought about her grandmother, who had cleaned courthouses at night while studying law books she wasn't allowed to use during the day. She thought about the Muslim attorney who had been so humiliated by her contempt charge that she'd transferred to another district. She thought about all the others who had paid their fines in silence, afraid to challenge the system. Yes, she said firmly, someone needs to be in the room where these decisions are made. Someone needs to keep track of the data and speak up when patterns emerge. As they walked toward the courtroom, Tasha glanced at the file Maya was carrying. What's that? Maya told her about the Watkins case and Judge Keller's suggestion. That's huge, Tasha whispered. That case could change housing policy across the state. I know. Maya felt the weight of the file in her hands, the weight of responsibility, of possibility. It's what I've been working toward all these years. They reached the doors of courtroom 4B, where a crowd had already gathered, buzzing with rumors about what was about to happen. Maya paused, taking a deep breath. Ready? Tasha asked. Maya touched her grandmother's cross, drawing strength from the connection to her past and the promise of the future. Ready? Together they walked into the courtroom, where Judge Keller was about to publicly acknowledge his mistake and commit to change, all because one woman had been brave enough to wear her cross and stand her ground. 6 months later, Maya stood at the window of her new office watching rain tap against the glass. The view wasn't spectacular, just the brick wall of the neighboring building and a slice of sky above. But the office itself represented a significant change. After taking on the Watkins case, she had received offers from several prestigious firms, but had instead chosen to start her own small practice, focusing on civil rights and constitutional law. The walls were still mostly bare, except for her diplomas, a few family photos, and a framed newspaper article with the headline, Court Establishes New Bias Prevention Guidelines After Attorney Challenges Judge. Maya smiled at the memory of that day in Judge Keller's courtroom. True to his word, the judge had made a public statement, acknowledging the pattern of bias Maya had documented and announcing the formation of a review committee. The courtroom had been packed, with attorneys standing along the walls to witness what many later described as a watershed moment for the district court. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Tasha entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder tucked under her arm. Ready for the big meeting? She asked, handing Maya one of the cups. As ready as I'll ever be, Maya replied, taking a grateful sip. The coffee was perfect, strong with just a touch of cream, the way she liked it. In the months since confronting Judge Keller, Maya had served as the lead consultant on the Court Procedures Committee, while simultaneously preparing the Watkins case. The work had been exhausting but rewarding. Today, the committee would present its final recommendations to the district's Judicial Council. How's Mrs. Rivera doing? Tasha asked, settling into one of the client chairs. Maya smiled. Great. The landlord finally fixed the heating system properly, and she's organizing a tenants association for the building. And Mr. Chen? His daughter passed the bar exam last month. She's joining the public defender's office. Tasha nodded appreciatively. You've been busy changing lives. Speaking of which, Maya said, glancing at the folder under Tasha's arm, is that what I think it is? Tasha grinned and handed over the folder. Hot off the press. The final statistical analysis of contempt, charges across all judges in the district, before and after the new guidelines were implemented. Maya opened the folder eagerly. For months they had been tracking the impact of the committee's work, gathering data to see if the new guidelines were making a difference. The charts and graphs told a compelling story, a significant reduction in contempt charges overall, and a near elimination of the racial and gender disparities that had previously been so pronounced. This is incredible, Maya said softly, turning the pages. I knew we were making progress, but seeing it laid out like this... And look at page 12, Tasha prompted. Maya flipped to the page and found a breakdown of Judge Keller's courtroom specifically. The change was dramatic, from having one of the highest rates of biased enforcement to one of the lowest. The judge had taken the committee's recommendations to heart, implementing them fully and consistently. He really did change, Maya said, surprised despite herself. People can surprise you, Tasha replied. Sometimes all they need is someone brave enough to hold up a mirror. They gathered their materials and headed out. In the reception area, Maya's new assistant, a law student working part-time, looked up from her computer. The Watkins plaintiffs called. They want to meet tomorrow to discuss the settlement offer from the city. Thanks. Zoe, let them know I'll be available at 10, outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening in the midday sun. They walked the 3 blocks to the courthouse, discussing the presentation they would give to the Judicial Council. Nervous? Tasha asked as they approached the imposing building. Maya touched the cross at her neck, a habit she had developed over the months. Not nervous, just aware of the importance of this moment. The council meeting was held in a large conference room on the 3rd floor. When Maya and Tasha entered, they found nearly 20 judges and court administrators seated around a polished table, with Judge Keller among them. He nodded to Maya with what looked like genuine respect. The chief judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Eleanor Harris, called the meeting to order. We're here to receive the final recommendations from the Court Procedures Review Committee. Ms. Johnson, I believe you're presenting the findings? Maya stepped forward, placing her materials on the podium. Over the next 30 minutes, she presented the committee's work, the extensive review of court procedures, the statistical analysis of enforcement patterns, and the recommended changes to ensure equal treatment for all who entered the district's courtrooms. The data is clear, she concluded. When guidelines are explicitly written, consistently applied, and regularly reviewed, disparities decrease dramatically. This isn't just about fairness in theory, it's about justice in practice. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before Judge Harris spoke. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. This is impressive work. Several judges asked questions which Maya answered with the confidence that came from months of deep immersion in the data. Judge Keller remained quiet until near the end, when he finally raised his hand. Ms. Johnson, given what you've learned through this process, what would you say is the most important factor in creating lasting change in our courts? Maya considered the question carefully. Accountability through transparency, Your Honor. When we track and publish data on how justice is applied, patterns become visible, and what's visible can be addressed. Judge Keller nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. After the presentation, the council voted unanimously to adopt the committee's recommendations. As people began gathering their things, Judge Keller approached Maya. A moment of your time, Ms. Johnson? They stepped into a quiet corner of the room, away from the others who were filtering out. I wanted to thank you, he said, his voice low, not just for your work on the committee, but for having the courage to challenge me that day in court. I was just standing up for what was right, Your Honor. Yes, you were, and in doing so, you made me a better judge. He paused. I understand the city has offered to settle the Watkins case. Maya nodded. We're discussing the offer tomorrow. Whatever you decide, that case has already changed things. 3 other districts have begun reviewing their housing policies because of the issues you raised. He extended his hand. Your grandmother would be proud. Maya shook his hand, surprised that he remembered that detail from her brief. Thank you, Your Honor. As they left the courthouse, Tasha bumped her shoulder playfully against Maya's. Look at you, changing the system from the inside. One small piece of it. Anyway, Maya replied, don't downplay it. Do you know how many attorneys have been talking about what you did? How many law students are citing your case in their papers? Maya hadn't given much thought to the broader impact of her actions. She had been too busy doing the work. They passed a small group of law students on the courthouse steps, obviously there for a class visit. One young woman, notebook in hand, looked at Maya with sudden recognition. Excuse me, are you Maya Johnson? The student asked, her voice tinged with excitement. Maya nodded, surprised. We just studied your constitutional argument against Judge Keller in my civil liberties class. Professor Dawson said it was one of the most effective challenges to biased court procedures he'd ever seen. The other students gathered around, eyes wide with admiration. Maya answered their questions patiently, offering advice about standing up for principles even when it seemed risky. As they walked away, Tasha grinned. See, I told you. You're becoming a legend. Maya laughed, hardly. But if my experience helps even one of those students find the courage to speak up when they see injustice, then it was worth it. They stopped at a small cafe for lunch, grabbing a table near the window. As they waited for their food, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rivera. "Tenant Association meeting tonight. We're naming you honorary member. Please come." "Another fan?" Tasha asked, noticing Maya's smile. "Something better. A reminder of why we do this work." Their food arrived, and as they ate, they talked about the future, the growth of Maya's practice, the Watkins settlement, the potential impact of the new court guidelines. There was still so much work to be done, so many systems that needed challenging, but today felt like a victory worth celebrating. As they were finishing, Maya noticed a young black attorney at a nearby table, nervously reviewing documents for what looked like an upcoming court appearance. Around her neck was a small cross, similar to Maya's own. Without hesitation, Maya wrote her phone number on a business card and walked over to the woman's table. "First time in district court?" she asked gently. The woman looked up, surprised. "Yes, how did you know?" "I remember that feeling." Maya handed her the card. "If you ever need advice or just someone to talk to about navigating the system, give me a call." The woman took the card, her expression shifting from surprise to gratitude. "Thank you. I will." Back at their table, Tasha was gathering her things. "What was that about?" Maya glanced back at the young attorney, who was now looking at her card with a small smile. "Paying it forward. We all need someone who sees us, who believes we belong in those courtrooms." Outside, the afternoon sun had broken through the clouds completely, casting long shadows across the city streets. Maya paused for a moment, feeling the warmth on her face and the weight of her grandmother's cross against her skin. "Ready to head back to the office?" Tasha asked. "We have the Watkins settlement to review." Maya nodded, filled with a quiet determination that had only grown stronger through all she had experienced. "Ready. There's still so much good work to do." Together, they walked down the street toward a future they were helping to shape. One case, one challenge, one small act of courage at a time.